the Mighty Pan Lozenge. Yes, I know it's Orson Scott Card, but I mean, come on, you've got to have it, really. Well, we have a few issues travelling to Westbury today. Jules hit a traffic jam because there was an accident, and my train is delayed by 8 minutes. I was going to get an earlier one because we're supposed to get into Westbury about 1:30, so it'll be about 1:40. So as long as Maurice is still good for 1:40, it's going to happen. Not to do industrial action, it sort of leaves on the line or something like that, overhead cables. You know what these things are like. I'm all for industrial action personally. Right, well, we're here. I've got a list. I'm just going to start shopping and you can watch me. Cool. Here's a little door, collision course. That's Collision with Kronos in the UK version. For you Baileyouts out there, and I hope there are many of you. And if not, why not? Sorry, I can't talk to you now, guys. I'm too busy having a good time. Harry Harrison. Got to have a list. Standing analog reader. Some good stuff in there. Kettner and Moore. Look at that. Silent green. Tie-in cover. Make room. Make room. Hello, Jules. That's right. Excuse me, I have to talk to Jules Burt. You know how it is. The last dangerous book haul, so it's the last book haul of the year. There will be something in sort of late December when I buy my sort of Christmas books from work. You know, I have sort of stuff building up throughout the month, and then on payday I usually apply the staff discount and get a few things. So this is really looking what I got at Zardos. All You Need Is Books. And I just want to sort of do a thanks here to Jules Burt for being so supportive of the channel, and those of you who have sort of watched the channel from the beginning will know that Jules and I have been friends for some years. We used to work together, and he's just been really helpful. Also mentioned for my cousin Neil, who has sort of helped me with some of the technical stuff. Thanks, Neil. And really just to thank all of you again for supporting me. And things are growing. I have lots of plans for next year. I'm not going to talk about them yet, but there's some real great surprises and stuff coming up. So without further ado, we'll have a bit of a look at my haul, and as you see, it's quite a bit. Now, my first visit to Zardos was the world exclusive first time anybody'd ever shot there in terms of film. So Jules's video, which went up nearly a week ago, you'll have seen that by now, and he's done an interview with Maurice and what have you. And as I filmed this, I'm looking forward to seeing and hearing it myself, because while he was doing that, I was shopping and also shooting and making a list for next time. So it was really exciting and great to have a chance to have a look at everything, because on my first sort of visit, Maurice and I were both on tight clocks. So thanks to Maurice as well. That was great, mate, to see you again and to get over there and what have you. So this is what we've got. And I'm just going to sort of get things out the bags first of all, and I haven't actually looked at these properly yet, so this is sort of pretty much as raw and naked as it comes. And yeah, you know, I took a list, and I also, you know, you take a list, and I looked what Maurice had on the website, which you can look at. Also, you know, he has listings on ABE. I find it easier to sort of search on ABE. Apparently he's working on a new website which will be better for mobile phone users, and fundamentally that is going to go up at some point soon. But do visit Zardos Allyouneedisbooks and have a look, because it's quite something. So yes, we've got quite a lot of stuff to get through here, as you see. So it's interesting. I've got this old Harlan Ellison here. I'll tell you why in a moment, but I'm going to stick that there instead in pride of place. So let's just have a look, and I'm going to sort of try and bring some sort of order to this, and we'll see what sort of comes out of it, really. You see things on the listings, and then you see them in the flesh, and sometimes they're not in the sort of condition you want or what have you, or you see other things. So there's always an element of improvisation, and never stick entirely to a list. But that was the list. As you can see, there's lots of things crossed off on there now, which is good. But of course you see other things as well, and you end up making a new list. So that's the way it goes. But let's begin. I think, just want to say again, thanks to Jules. Jules actually gave me this. This is John Boyd, The Last Starship from Earth, which I believe was Boyd's first novel and massively acclaimed. I have read this a long time ago, and it's a pan. That's a Chris Foss cover, really beautiful, as you can see. And this is about the nicest edition, and it had quite a lot of acclaim, and I think this came out in the 60s, and there's an amazing write-up of it in 1968, amazing write-up of that in the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction. And it is really good, actually. I've not read it for years, but it's very much the thing which set him off and got him the career. He was American and sort of science-based figure, and I would say if you're going to pick one book by John Boyd, go for that. So thanks for that, Jules. Thanks very much, because that's in beautiful nick, and it's quite an uncommon book in that cover in really good condition. So Jules got me that, and that was from the video he did a while ago where he had a box of books. He bought a lot, and there's lots of really nice SF in A format and some UFO books, some of which I think are quite rare. So that's that. So thanks for that, Jules. That's a real special thing. What a great friend he is. It's so good to have friends, isn't it? This is going to be a gift for somebody. Maybe somebody who watches this channel. If I don't give it to them, I'm going to keep it myself, because I have got another copy, but it's quite scarce. And this is Bruce Sterling's Involution Ocean in NEL, which in the States was in the Harlan Ellison Discovery series. I have mentioned this before, and you'll notice there's no blurb on the back. And interestingly, the cover of Dune from this period has no blurb on the back either, and because Dune was a really famous book. This was Sterling's first novel, circa 78, 79. And it's absolutely fantastic, and I read this in the early 80s, and Involution Ocean is a fantastic book, and I would describe it as the punk Dune. It's got an awful lot of similarities to Dune. It's almost like a parody of a pastiche of it. It's much shorter, as you can see. In my opinion, it's a far better book. And it has some real inventive stuff in it. It takes place on a planet called Null Aqua, which of course is Latin for no water. And there is a video about this in the early days of the channel, which says that if you're bored with Dune, you should read this. Even if you like Dune, you should read this, because it's very much the punk Dune. And I think when we talk about cyberpunk, even though Bruce Bethke coined it, and Gibson is the definitive one. The spirit really begins with people like Sterling and John Shirley's City Come a Walk In, which is a bit later, and I'll talk about John again because he's cool. So that's a good one as well. So if you ever see it, pick it up. It hasn't been in print for years and it's a total classic. Another cherry I picked, and this is an old favourite of mine, is this nice Triad Granada edition in A format of the Unlimited Dream Company, Ballard's fantasy novel from the early 80s. And Burgess says on the cover, best thing this fine author's ever done. These A formats are uncommon now, and I must say Maurice gave me a really good price on everything. And I say I've got a hardcover signed first of this, but you know, these are really nice, and I used to have a lot back in the day and I got rid of them, and I'm trying to pick them up as I come across them, and it's quite hard now because there's not many out there and collectors have snaffled them up. And that's a great one. I think that's in my book 100 must read fantasy novels. I'm pretty sure it's in there, and it is unusual. Ballard has these periods where he seems to be not certain what direction he's going, and this was the sort of late 70s, early 80s was that kind of thing. Before Empire of the Sun, but it's a really great one, and look at that with the Cessna underwater on the cover, absolutely fantastic. So that's beautiful, because I do love my Grafton, Granada, what have you. Now if you're wondering what Triad means, Triad comes out of a deal in the 70s that 3 publishers had with Panther as it transitioned to Granada, and basically what it came down to is that those 3 publishers were Bodley Head, Jonathan Cape, and what was the other one? Cape, Bodyhead, and Chato and Windus. So all had associations, so very literary publishers from early in the century, and I love all their books. They're great imprints. They pretty much don't exist anymore. They're all imprints now, I think, of Random House, Penguins. So Cape I particularly love. But yeah, that's really cracking. So I was really, really pleased with that. That's a nice one. You'll see in the background there, I've got some new writings in SF, which I picked up from Maurice. I'm not going to show you too much of those today. I'm going to talk about those again because I want to do an anthologies video soon, because I'm getting back into anthologies. And what spurred me with those is the fact that I've got quite a few in hardcover, and I used to buy them depending what the content was, and the content very often was by people like this. Probably the priest that I've read the least, is A Dream of Wessex. It's the American edition, The Perfect Lover. I've only read this twice, so I must go back to it, because it's sort of like a sort of moment where he's transitioning, which is really interesting. So there you go, and that's really beautiful. Look at that text block. We'll probably look at that later on. Yeah, Christopher Priest and M. John Harrison were the people who got me picking up new writings in SF. I was trying to collect their early, then maybe uncollected and scarce short stories. And as I say, this is the US edition of Dream of Wessex, his last novel of the 70s. So a toned text block there, as you can see, and it's very beautiful. It's Dell, and I've known of this, since the mid 80s when I first got into Chris's stuff. But I've never actually had a copy with The Perfect Lover, not that I can remember. There is a hardcover which is quite handsome. I should try and pick that up because I am a Chris completist. The text, I believe, is exactly the same. And I must check that with him though. It's got very interesting early virtual reality stuff in there, way ahead of what he did in the extremes in the 90s. But that's really, really beautiful. So I saw that and I thought, I've got to have that. So that was another cherry I picked. My other really amazing score that I got from Maurice was Seek Light by K.W. Jeter, introduced by Barry Malzberg. I mean, this is kind of heaven for me. I love Jeter. I worship Malzberg, if I'm quite honest. This is Laser Books number 7, edited by Roger Elwood, and it's got a Califrius jacket, which is cracking, isn't it? Look at that. And these are from the 70s, and this I think is Jeter's first or second novel. It's an early one. And Laser Books, they had sort of strict editorial rules. They were numbered, as you see. That's number 7. And let's have a quick look inside. Let's see, 75. So he'd written Dr. Adder by this point, but of course Dr. Adder, nobody would publish it. Even Philip K. Dick couldn't convince people to publish it. And there is a video on the channel about Dr. Adder, and I've not monetized that video because some of the material in Dr. Adder is really quite near the knuckle. It's an amazing book. So I've not read this. So there's another Laser one, and I can't for the life of me think what it's called off the top of my head. It's not Dark Seeker, which I must try and pick up. I was really pleased to get that. I've got to try and get that sticker off. With Laser Books, there was very much this sort of editorial policy. There was no atheism allowed in the books and no sex, which was interesting because when you read some of Jeter's other stuff, well, what can I say? Scarily good, but I'm really, really pleased with that. So that's another total cherry that I picked there. Fantastic stuff. And now we'll move on to some other things. In mentioning Bruce Sterling, of course, I really should let you see this. This is Mirror Shades, the Cyberpunk anthology. Now this is a reprint, and I know it's a reprint because it has the HarperCollins Flame and Water on there. The first was a Paladin, and of course it was a hardcover in the USA, and I used to have the Paladin and I got rid of it. I don't know why, it's sort of space, and I've not actually got this out of the bag yet, so I'm going to unbag it, which is great. So it's really nice to have that again, and that was another sort of cherry that Maurice let me pick there, which was fantastic. So I'm showing you sort of like my favourite scores first, I guess, with these, but that's great. And some of these stories I've not read for years, and it's interesting who's in here. Greg Bear's in here, and of course we think of Greg Bear as purely a hard SF writer, and you know, wow, this is fantastic. Tom Maddox, I've not read for years. I think Tom Maddox came up with the idea of ice in Neuromancer. Intrusion countermeasures, I can't remember what the E is for, you know, the thing that kills the cyberspace cowboys if they breach the walls of data too far. Rudy Rucker, Mark Laidlaw's 400 Boys. I have had contacts with Mark online, not for some time. He's a correspondent. He's such a great guy, he really is, and I'm going to do something with Mark at some point. I must get in touch with him. Lewis Shiner, John Shirley, you know, all the great names. James Patrick Kelly, and Paul DeFilippo, who again I'm in contact with a lot online because he's a contributor to Deep Ends like me, and you know, some great collabs in there. So it's really good to have that in the library again. At some point I'd like to try and pick up a first of that, so a hardcover first. But yeah, really great stuff, and it's a shame it's not a Paladin, but I'm not complaining. It's just so good to be back in the library again. It really is. So courtesy of Zardos, all you need is books, as I keep saying. But why wouldn't I? Now, of course, Silverberg is always looming large. He's not looming large. He always looks very fit. It's looming large in my universe, and I'm just going to try and take this sticker off here because it's really bugging me. It's a Forbidden Planet sticker. Look at that! Wow, because this is a Silverberg. This is Valentine Pontifex from the Magic series, of course, with a Jim Burns jacket, as you would expect, in Bantam. Lovely. And you know, it's a shame a lot of these of Jim's paintings on these were only ever on paperbacks, especially the early ones, but later on he did get some hardcovers as well. That's lovely. So that's really, really nice. These, of course, were really successful for Robert. They're amongst my sort of least favourites of his works, but they are really good. They're really ornate. And if you like a planetary romance or a fantasy novel, they're fantastic stuff. They really are. And this is sent to Byzantium, which I think, who read this recently? I think Matt Defoe at Science Fiction Reads read this recently and he enjoyed it. I think it was that one he read. And this is a DOS chapbook, a Tor double. If I can just get it in the frame there. And it's got Gene Wolfe's 7 American Nights on the back, which is really, really nice. I think my friend Graham's got like a complete collection of these. You know, I do like a DOS chapbook. Of course, the most familiar ones are the Ace ones, which are mostly from the 60s, and I don't really collect those, but I do like some of the sort of 80s ones, and maybe I'll make more effort to get those. That was number 10, and that's a Silverberg from the early 80s. So yeah, a bit of Bob there. We've got to have a bit of Bob. It's what it's all about, really. Going back to John Boyd, who I mentioned earlier on, who Jules bought me that last Starship from Earth. There's the Pollinators of Eden. This is a Dell. There is a really nice pan version of this, and I think I used to have it, but and I'm sure I read it, but it sort of went to the way of all flesh at some point. When I've got rid of books in the past, often it's been because the condition of them, and I sort of try and upgrade. So that one's back in the library because I'm trying to not quite be a completist, but get most of Boyd's important work. And this is one, this the sort of, I wasn't aware of until comparatively recently. And this is Sex and the High Command, as you see, which appears to have a giant Satsuma on the cover. And I mean, the title alone, you know what I'm like. I'm a sucker for titles. It does have a rippled spine. It's a Bantam. and Sex and the High Command. You can't really go wrong with a title like that, can you? So Women's Lib Gone Wild. So perhaps it's a critique of feminism. Ooh, is that correct? Pretty correct these days? Probably not. But yeah, Sex and the High Command, great title. So that instantly was a buy. I'd have bought, you know, if the book has a title like that, I'll buy it anyway. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. But yeah, and it's quite an uncommon one. It's got science fiction up there if you're not certain. So a couple of John Boyds. And here's another sort of obscurity. This is Vincent King, Another End, and this is still bagged, as you see. Now, Vincent King was a British writer, very ornate and flavoursome. Some would say that he overwrote, and it's in a bag. We'll just pop that out of the bag a minute and cast that aside. And I'm not that familiar with this one. I have read stuff by him. Candyman is the one which is probably the most prominent, and that was a Gollancz hardcover. And yeah, this is absolutely sort of wild stuff. He was really sort of florid and stylistic and strange, almost like having, you know, eating a lot of Turkish delight, you know, so not always entirely effective, but completely original and strange. So, and look at that, there's some sort of people there in that sort of exhaust from that space probe. So that's pretty interesting cover. So, you know, good sort of British obscurity there to go with the John Boyds, which of course are American. So let me just stack those up and we'll see what else comes out. So I'm trying to do this in some sort of order, whether it's making any sense, I don't know. Here's a lozenge I don't have. I have actually read this, but I am sort of moving towards completism on these, which I've sort of tried to avoid really, but you know, they're just so brilliant, so beautiful to look at. I really feel it's time now for the pan lozenge, and you saw me earlier on right at the beginning flashing this Orson Scott card, which isn't an uncommon book. It's quite difficult to find in good nick, and he just won the John W. Campbell Award for Best SF Writer of 78, and I think that was for the original story of Ender's Game, Planet Called Treason. And you know, I do veer towards completism with the lozenge because I love it so much. Some of them are impossible to get in good nick, particularly Aldis's Non-Stop. There's a non-fiction one by Arthur C. Clarke called The View from Serendips. If you've got those in good nick, you know, get in touch, you never know. And yeah, so that's really, really lovely. And Card, I find him a manipulative writer. I've no problem with that because writers should do what they like, in my opinion. But that one I've not read. That's an early one. And this is, as you see, Heinlein, Waldron Magic Ink. And again, you know, Heinlein, I blow hot and cold, mostly cold, but I do love this livery and this graphic design and what have you. And Maurice had a few nice copies of this, so I could cherry pick, which was fantastic. So at some point, I did make a list once. I need to make a list again of all the pan lozenges, and I think there's only a few I don't have. The ones I don't have are I Among the Blind by Robert Holdstock, which I used to have, but it's very uncommon. And in good nick, again, very hard to find. The one I had was a mess. I've got a Faber first edition, but I just really, really like, you know, the pans. And also there's one of, is it Earthwind? It's Earthwind is a pan lozenge, and I did see a copy of that at Zardos, but it wasn't quite in the nick I require. The Custodians by Richard Cowper, again, which I used to have. You see, this is the thing, you know, I'm sort of terribly whimsical at getting rid of stuff, and it's always because of space and money and things. So, but I am moving towards assembling my final library now, and I guess I'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, the pan lozenge, always a Tolt design classic. Last time I came, I bought like this, a fairly pristine Neuromancer from Maurice with an unbroken spine, because I've got my original's one of these and it was signed. And look at this one, so it's still bagged, it's in good nick. So, you know, get on the website, Allyouneedisbooks, and I think, you know, you should snap that up really. Great jacket, that. Quite a nice Count Zero, that as well. I got hardcover first, signed by the great man himself, of course, but you can't really argue with that. Speaking of design classics, then we move on to the very, very wonderful Grafton. In the sort of 80s, I think it was around about 85, Granada became Grafton because they were bought up by HarperCollins a few years earlier, and HarperCollins' office were on Grafton Street in London. And I mean, this is a book I used to have in this livery, and I'm chuffed to have it because it's really hard to find, especially with an unbroken spine. There's a bit of fading there. And this is The Eyes of the Overworld by Jack Vance, as you can see, which is the second Dying Earth book. This is the one, the first one with Kugel, the Clever, in it, and so it's kind of part of a diptych that comes in the middle of the series. Eyes the Overworld and Kugel Saga are the second and third books, and Rialto the Marvellous is the fourth one. And I now have all of them in this livery, and these ones I used to sell a lot in the 80s, and you know, I didn't buy them, which is really, really foolish. So I'm absolutely delighted to have that. At some point I'll show you the whole lot together. Another book I never bought at the time, and I can't for the life of me understand why, is Charles Platt's Less Than Human, which obviously is a riff on More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon. This one's still bagged, as you see, and I've not actually read this one. I am a fan of Charles, and I don't know why I didn't buy it at the time. You know, you had to be picky and choosy, and I was starting to get my first together. And he did a book for Piers Anthony. He did a sequel to one of Piers Anthony's books. Was it Soma? And that didn't sort of sit well with me. But, you know, Piers Anthony was rocking the cash then, and I guess Charles needed the money because he's not like a commercial writer, he's an artist. And it's great to have that, and again, trying to find with an unbroken spine. So another beautiful Grafton. So I'm just sort of like loving it. I do. If you said to me you can have one copy of every single A format book by one publisher, even above the Panlogians, I would probably go with Grafton, really, because they're just great. So I love them, and they were so strong, and they did such great SF. At the end of the 80s, they really sort of tailed off, and they did more and more fantasy, and they seemed to lose a lot of the rights. And I think Gollancz was sort of reclaiming the rights to all sorts of things, because Gollancz didn't do paperbacks till 86, so they would license them out. But then they started to do their own paperbacks and pulled them back in. So a lot of things which had been with other publishers, Grafton, Sphere, Pan, you name it, went back to Gollancz, and that had a big effect on people's lists. And here's another Grafton. This is Aldous. Brian, of course, Panther science fiction, as you see. It says Panther even though it's Grafton there. They kept Panther because Panther was such a strong indicator of SF. And Jules and I were talking the other day, and we were saying that we think the first 100 or so Panthers are all SF, but they go back to the 50s and 60s. So Star Swarm, which is a short story collection, I believe. And what is it? No, I think it's, let's just have a look. I've not read this one, actually. Yeah, I get a feeling this is a fix-up of stories which fix into a novel, and not one of my favourite covers, but I love this typeface. Absolutely marvellous, really, really good. And I am trying to sort of pick up my holes in my Brian collection. And of course, the thing is he's very prolific, so I'm not aiming for completism. I'm just trying to get the handful of sort of Grafton ones I don't have, and I think the one which I don't have, which I really want, and I want the earlier version, because again, I had it when I was a kid and let it go, is Galaxies Like Grains of Sand. I'm looking for a particular livery. It's the livery before this, and that's proving really hard to find, but it will happen because I love that title, Galaxies Like Grains of Sand. And that was what drew me to the book in the first place, and it was my third oldest, I think, after Frankenstein Unbound was my second, and The Interpreter, aka Bow Down to Null, which is a great poppy book about alien invasion. They were my first ones, and Galaxies Like Grains of Sand was a fix-up, again, short stories which formed a quasi-novel. And I must say it was probably a little bit too sophisticated and subtle for me, so I need to reread it. So that was an early oldest, but I'm very pleased with that because, you know, Brian, he was really special, and I met him a few times, didn't event with him once, and what a great guy he was, and a real SF scholar, charming man, and great mainstream novelist as well. Time now for a few odds. Obviously this is Jack Vance, Inferio, which tends to be Vance's generally most highly regarded singleton, I would say, and this is a Door one, and I do have this, but I think the copy I have now is in a Library of America anthology, and Library of America are great, but the paper's very thin, so even though, you know, on the surface they're great, actually reading them is a bit of a pain, so I wanted to reread this, and the Door one is nice. So there we go. And as I've said before, the thing with Door is that everybody's bonkers about collecting them these days, and actually if you want a complete checklist, obviously it's on websites. Maurice does a little chapbook, Zardos, so there is a sort of Door collectors thing. I think it's by Beccon Press, Beccon, and I've got one here somewhere, and I think I showed it in the early days of the channel. But you know, they are really nice, but there's an awful lot of very minor stuff in Door. There's some great stuff like Vance and Dick and Moorcock, and there's lots of odd things, but there's some real crap as well, it has to be said. So, you know, if you buy them just for the covers, that's fine. But what I would say about Door is, you know, cherry pick, do your research. you know, look in the Science Fiction Encyclopedia, which now is a website. You have no excuse. It's not as good as a website as it was as a book. It's not quite as critical, I don't feel, as it was. It reserves judgment a bit more, which I don't like. I like the critical factor. So, you know, look some things up and, you know, be certain before you buy, because some of it is absolute crud. A lot of it looks great, I know, but a lot of it is not really very good. Anyway, something I did buy for the cover, and I've already got this actually, but I've got a different version. This is Hoka by Poul Anderson and Gordon R. Dixon. And the Hokas are a race of alien teddy bears, as you can see, and this one's doing the whole sort of Napoleon Bonaparte thing. And I love this cover, and there are other variations of this, but this is the nice one. And the Hoka stories started to appear in the late 50s, and they were first collected under the title Earthman's Burden, which would probably be very politically incorrect these days. And I've got a paperback with that title, and you can get the hardcover reasonably easy. I can't think who published it. I'm not an expert on publishing of SF in the 50s. I know all the books, so I often can't think who actually published them, because I don't collect in that period because it's too expensive for me. So yeah, so this is great. And the whole idea behind these is they're sort of funny stories, except I must say they've never really sort of made me laugh. They're just quite sweet, and they were fan favourites. And the Hokas basically are this intelligent alien race of teddy bears, and they make sort of contact with human beings. And they love people. They just think we're great. They're the opposite of the hostile alien. They think we're fantastic. But they have one real problem with our culture, which is that they cannot understand the difference between fiction and reality. So they read things like Sherlock Holmes, or they read up on the Wild West, and they think it's all real and they think it's all great. So they have their own little cultural things. Like there's one story, I think it's in this one, where it's like a western town and there's little teddy bears dressed like cowboys and stuff, and it's very funny, very sweet. But that is kind of my favourite, and they're still in print, but they're sort of very large format, royal format trade paperbacks from Bayern, which is weird because people associate Bayern as being right-wing and military, but it's not all like that. But they do a lot of Poul Anderson. The covers are not as good, so that's lovely. It's charming. I've always wanted one in decent nick. It's got a bit of a ding down there, but you know, it's nice. And that's Tor. Really, really sweet. Lovely. The galaxy's only race of sentient teddy bears. What can you say? But, you know, Anderson and Dixon, sort of hardcore sort of conservatives, really. They have their virtues, but I very much find that Poul, his fantasy, is by far his best work. Now, this is an oddity, which I hadn't come across before, and I saw it, and I like the look of it, so I just thought I'm having that. And it's still bagged, as you see. And this is Utopia 3 by George Alec Effinger, who I have read. When Gravity Fails was sort of an 80s classic. He started his career in the 70s, and the original title was Death in Florence, it says there. And I love anything Italian, as you probably know. And as it says, where life is a test with no right answers. And Kirkus reviews. Kirkus is an American literary magazine that does reviews, and they're really good reviews, it has to be said. There's nothing really like Kirkus in the UK, and we could do with something. And it says Effinger is a mix of Doonesbury and Kafka, which is, you know, enough to get anybody going, really. And that's really lovely. And let's see, it's Playboy Press. Well, there you go. I don't have much Playboy Press stuff. That's really nice. So I'm just going to take it out here, and it says, a paradise created amid the abandoned cities of Europe, where three people must pass the test of life. Unfortunately, there are no right answers, no right questions, and an invisible test giver. That sounds fantastic. I mean, if I could go amongst the sort of cities of Europe and take that test, I would be there. So that would be my utopia. Now, can I actually get it out of the bag? Probably not, because it's taped down. But I'm going to do that, and you can feast your eyes on what's there. And there we are. Just cast the bag aside. Oops, ding the camera. Oh, stools. And isn't that lovely? So really, really great. Love the look of that. Yeah, and you've got Lina Tara Pisa there. There's like a little cat in the tree, and you've got, yeah, Eiffel Tower. It's all there. Fantastic. Bruno Shalley's dome, maybe. Anyway, I'm going to pop that in Pride of Places. I think that's very handsome. So there we go. So those are some sort of odds, really, and I was very pleased with those. So I'm just going to add those to my little stacks here as they're going. And this is actually quite organised. Fantastic stuff. Time for some new wave. And somebody who I really have neglected in terms of my collecting and getting a complete collection together is Norman Spinrad. And I love Norman's work. This is the Solarians, his first book, which is not uncommon. Look at that for a cover. Paperback library original. Very nice. There's lots of these out here, but there's not many in good nick. This one's in quite good nick, and as you can see, this is sort of ticking all the BEM boxes, the bug-eyed monster, and you know, wow, scary stuff. And yeah, so I'm going to pick up that. I was going to pick up a copy of one of the other ones, and the title escapes me, but it wasn't in the sort of condition I want. So, but I do like Norman, so I'm sort of trying to get into completism there. A book which I don't really need because I have it in another form is this book by Thomas M. Dish, 102 H-bombs. And as you see, this is compact, 3 and 6, so it's a 60s British. Compact used to publish SF Impulse, a really good magazine in a format paperback thing, and I'll show you an issue of Impulse at some point. In fact, bear with me, I'll get one now, hang on. Well, actually, I couldn't find any copies of Impulse. I know there's some here somewhere, so I do apologise. But as I was saying, I've already got this, except I haven't, because what I've got is a later version with different contents. Look at Dish there. Look how young he is. My God, that's amazing. Good grief, nothing like it. He's got plenty of hair in that one. Look, that's incredible. And let's see what date this is. But yeah, I've got a later version, which is called White Fang Goes Dingo, which again, one of the best titles in history. And you know, 102 H-bombs is a good title. And this is 1966. And White Fang Goes Dingo is in here. That's the short version of The Puppies of Terror, one of his early novels, and that's Terra, T-E-R-A, Latin for Earth. So, you know, that's the thing. And so I think there's some in here I might not have, but it's absolutely beautiful nick. It really is. Unbroken spine, unrippled. It's really clean. And I haven't toothbrushed these yet, so I must do that. But 102 H-bombs, I do love Dish. So that was so beautiful, I thought, as a new wave freak. I just had to have that, because you usually see these things and they're in a total state. But that wasn't, so it's fantastic to see. So that really was my little sort of new wave section there, really. Nice. Right, that Harlan Ellison I brandished. This is Doomsman. And it's again, it's a there's 2 books in here. Look at that, it's got a Kent Cigarettes advert in the middle. Good grief. And lovely tone text block, and it's Belmont Tower. This is a reissue because it's got The Thief of Thoth by Lynn Carter in there, and it's got the dreaded sci-fi on it. Oh no, we don't say sci-fi on this channel, we always say SF. Gosh, I hadn't noticed that. That's shocking. But yeah, that's great. And the reason I bought this was because, look at that, lovely unbroken spine. And this was a book that if you presented a copy of this to Ellison back in the day, if you were lucky enough to meet him, he would tear it up because he hated Doomsman. He really, really hated it. And this is a reprint. Now, I do have, I think, what I think is a first here, which I've had this for decades. And Maurice did have one of these, and I've always hated it. Look at that lean on the spine, isn't it dreadful? And I have read it, and it's not very good. By Ellison standards, it's dreadful. It's a total mess. And he did have one in much better nick than this, and I thought, should I get that as well? And you know, because strangely, even though I've wanted to get rid of this and replace it for ages, I've become quite attached to it, really. But I think I'm gonna get rid of it. Telepower by Lee Hoffman I can live without, but you know, this is sort of really collectible stuff, really. But I was really pleased to get a nice edition. So you know, it's, you know, there's not much Ellison I don't have. I don't have things like Sex Gang under the name Paul Merchant, which of course is a very early one, very collectible book, £600 you're looking or more in an A format, ace paperback, lots of juvenile delinquent stories. I've got loads of the other ones. I'm not too bothered. I'm never going to have that sort of money to pay out. I wouldn't pay it out maybe if I did, you know, I'd be able to go on some hardcovers, but you know, there's not much Ellison I don't have. But more importantly, so I can get rid of this, and this is the next one is a similar ballpark thing, really, because this is Ellison as well, and this is super uncommon in the UK, and this is Phoenix Without Ashes by Edward Bryant and Harlan Ellison in Fawcett Gold Medal. And this is a novelization of the TV series which Ellison wrote called The Star Lost, which is I've only ever seen a bit of it. It absolutely bombed. Ellison hated it. You have this huge multi-habitat starship out in space, and the habitats are all disconnected from each other, and there's like a central hub, people living them, and they don't really realise. So it's kind of almost like Generation Starship meets Silent Running, I guess. And yeah, it's he was not very happy about it, Harlan, and this is the novelisation. Now, I've read this. I've had a Savoy edition for decades, as I bought it when it was still new in the UK. And even though I really admire Savoy as a publisher, they used to do these things in this horrible sort of large format, which is bigger than a B, very cheap paper. And I've got it here somewhere. I don't know where I put it, but it's one of those books that, you know, I am a bore. I do wish that books were only standard formats, and it wasn't a standard format book. And whenever you get a book that's not a standard format, if you've got a small house and not a lot of shelving space, they're always a nightmare to shelve, and they stick out, so it gets moved around all the time. So to have this in an A is an absolute joy. And it's written by Edward Bryant, really. He did the prose, Ellison's ideas, but it's not bad. But I'm so pleased with that. So that will enable me to get rid of my Savoy one. And again, am I going to have that sort of crisis of sentimentality? No, I think I'm going to move it on, because the format just really annoyed me. So anyway, that's going in Pride of Place, where George Alec Effinger was. So there you go. He's going to cover up the New Wave guys there for now on the podium. Nice. This provides a nice segue now, because we're going to do anthologies. And, you know, when you come to a really important anthology, one of the most important anthologies ever, arguably the most important one, and certainly one of the best-selling ones, was Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Visions, which you can get as a Golax Masterwork. It's nothing to get excited about, but this is again Dangerous Visions, the sequel, and this is book 1 of 2 in Pan. And so I used to have copies of this, and they were estate. This has got a nice spine on it. I had Sphere editions, and so I'm looking out for number 2, and I've been wanting a decent copy for ages. And this is a decent one. And if you know anything about Dangerous Visions, obviously it was a huge new wave thing for the USA. There were British writers in there as well. This was the sequel. You know, they sold hugely. And Ellison was then compiling a 3rd volume called The Last Dangerous Visions, and it never happened. And there was quite a lot of acrimony from certain writers, how, you know, they'd put work into it, and it was supposed to be amazing. And Ellison kept telling stories about how he was going to come out, who was going to do it. And it all seemed rather sort of unlikely, and Chris Priest sort of took it apart. When I first met Chris in '87 at the Worldcon, he was handing out a privately published essay, which is sort of A4 in sort of a sort of black binding on yellow paper, called The Last Dead Lost Visions, about his critique of it. And there were only 30 copies, and they were signed and numbered, and Chris gave me one. And, you know, we'd only met each other, you know, literally a day or two before, and we clicked straight away. And so I got to read it. It was later published as a sort of slightly different version called The Book on the Edge of Forever, which is a reference to Ellison's Star Trek screenplay for City on the Edge of Forever. And basically it really caused a problem, because Ellison was not happy, and, you know, Chris is a man of great integrity, and Ellison felt that his integrity was challenged. So, you know, it became a big thing. Now the theory is that next year we're going to see reissues in the States of Dangerous Visions, again Dangerous Visions, and I say this is only half of it, and the last Dangerous Visions is finally going to happen. Well, we'll all believe it when we see it, but isn't that nice? This Pan lozenge. And I'd say this isn't too difficult to pick up, but, you know, it's always in a state. It's always got a broken spine. So this is an unbroken spine. So I'm really pleased with that. And there's some great stuff in here, you know. Look at that. Gene Wolfe, Ray Nelson, Chad Oliver, Kate Wilhelm, Joanna Russ is when it changed. This Kurt Vonnegut story, The Big Space. Well, I'm not going to say that. That is such a funny story. I've not read that for years. Really, really good. David Gerald. There's some great people in there, so, you know, there's some really good stuff. And theoretically this was new wave, but, you know, Dangerous Visions to me was broader than that. So there we go. But, you know, really, really nice. So it's both a Pan lozenge and an Ellison. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that for me, really. So anthologies. As I say, I've had a bit of an anthologies thing recently. I'm going to do an anthologies video or 3 soon. Here's another I'm just debagging. That doesn't mean I'm taking trousers down. And this is in Fontana, Silverberg, Threads of Time. And I bought this purely because, I mean, it's just really beautiful. Gregory Benford, Simak and Spinrad. Simak, I'm not really a massive fan of. Maybe I should read more, but I keep being disappointed. People tell me I won't be, but I always found him fairly minor. He's sort of like a clunkier Ray Bradbury, I always think. And yeah, you know, there's some great stuff in this. The Marathon Photograph is quite famous. Riding the Torch by Spinrad is quite a well-known Spinrad story. But yeah, Fontana, really, really nice. I love Fontana. They're beautiful. Really, really nice. And their B format imprint in the 80s was Flamingo, of course, and they're part of HarperCollins. But that's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. And it's so clean as well, the text block. Lovely. So Anthologies, I know that's a thing of Jules's as well. So, you know, it's really quite something. Did I say earlier on that, you know, that first shoot I did at Zardos was like a world exclusive? That was the first time anybody had ever shot there. So it was great to go back. We didn't have a lot of time the first time, but I had time to look, and it was just marvellous to spend time looking. It really was, and you just come across little things. And here's another cracking anthology, which again, I've not seen in good nick for a long time. I used to have a copy of this in poor condition. This is The New Tomorrows by Norman Spinrad, Belmont Tower. And this is a really fantastic 60s new wave collection. The stuff in this is just wonderful, you know. And Norman Spinrad is the Norman Mailer of science fiction. I knew I got that from somewhere because I always used to say it, and I obviously got it from here, but it's absolutely true. The attitude, you know, it's all there. Nice tone text block. So let's just have a look what's in here, because this is really fantastic stuff. It's dedicated to Phil Farmer. Well, quite rightly so as well. And then you look in here, and this is like really so great new wave stuff. Pleasure Garden of Philippe Sagittarius by Michael Moorcock, later adjusted to sort of link to the Von Beck stories. Driftglass by Delaney, great stuff. Silverberg, Bryant. The Garden of Delights by Langdon Jones, the great Welsh SF writer and musicologist. He's the guy who put together the extant bits of the third Gormenghast book, but Titus Alone by Mervyn Peake, and he sort of cemented it together so it formed a proper novel. Well done, Langdon. He died about a year and a half ago. Great shame. He was really good. Commercially, you know, unsuccessful. Really, really hard to read. You know, very challenging but very rewarding. Dame Terry Champagne, I don't know, I suspect that's a pseudonym, but I need to look into that. Damon Knight, a great story by Ellison, Pennies Off a Dead Man's Eyes, go favourite that. John Sladek, read that one many times. A Dish. The Last Trial of the Golden Horde by Spinrad himself, which is a wonderful Jerry Cornelius story in which Jerry kills like a huge sort of Mongol horde of horse riders, and there's loads of them, hundreds of them. He kills them with an electric violin, which is like the coolest thing ever. Very prog, that, very Hawkwind. And, you know, you get titles like this. Circularization of Condensed Conventional Straight Line Word Image Structures, Michael Butterworth. Michael Butterworth wrote Time of the Hawklords, the Hawkwind novel, co-credited to Moorcock. He was part of Savoy, the bookshop, the publisher. Great stuff, you know. Bob Marsden, that's familiar. What's that? I need to look into that. And it closes with The Jungle Rot Kid on the Nod by Philip Jose Farmer, which is Tarzan, but as if written by William S. Burroughs, as opposed to Edgar Rice Burroughs. And beautiful. As I say, normally you see this and it's in a mess. Really great stuff. So lovely anthologies there. Nearly coming to the end of this haul now, and a couple more anthologies to go. So this is one. This is fairly common. You can pick this up a lot. This is Deep Space, edited by Silverberg, and there's some good names. It's Corgi, which is very nice. It's just one of those things I thought I'll finally get around to one day, and I did finally. And it's got some great stuff in it. It's got Chad Oliver, I mentioned earlier on, who I don't really have enough Chad Oliver in my collection really. Jack Vance, Harlan Ellison's Life Hutch, which is a great story. It's a late 50s one. It's one of his best early SF stories. And I seem to remember that may be one of the Kaiban stories related to things like, not Worlds to Kill, what's it called? The other one in Beast That Shouted Love. Run for the Stars. I think it's a Kaiban story. There's a similarity between that, so I remember, with a film called Hardware by Richard Stanley, which is a great sort of 80s British SF film. Came out around the very end of the 80s, which is great fun. And it got into problems legally with 2000 AD magazine because they were supposedly based on a story which I think was called Shock. But I saw certain similarities between Life Hutch and that Richard Stanley film. It could be my memory, so do forgive me, but I'll look at that and talk about that again at some point. I must do some more film content. I'm just going to work out how you get around the copyright problems. Silverberg, Dixon, Terry Carr, great editor. and A. Van Vogt there representing, and it's sort of his deep space stories, so you know, it's good solid stuff. So really nice anthology there, as I say, not uncommon. You can pick that up, so we'll just zip that around there, and we're going to look at those new writings in SF again. I picked up, let me just see, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 of them there. I tend to collect the later ones as they have more of the new wave guys in them. It's mostly British stuff. We were looking at Jules, has been trying to get the whole lot. There were 30 altogether, initially edited by John Carnell, who edited New Worlds before Moorcock did. And then he moved on to that, and I think they did about 2 issues a year of new writings in SF. And then Ken Bulmer took it on when Carnell died. I think that was the early 70s. Ken Bulmer, of course, also known as Alan Burt Akers, if you're a Dore fan, or was your Dre Prescott novels, which look just wild. So yeah, but so I'm thinking about it, and some of the early ones were reprinted in the early 70s in Corgi, and Jules was saying, reprints, I'm not buying reprints, so there you go, purism at its best. To finish off, I was really pleased with this. Now it does have, it is missing a corner there, but this is a book, this is a reading copy. This is History of the Science Fiction Magazine, Part 1, 1926 to 1935, and somebody's written on there as well, and anyhow, but I don't care, because Mike Ashley is a man who knows his stuff. He edits the British Library sort of SF series, which is mostly early British SF, and I've got later volumes in this series, and I think they're mostly out of print now. Liverpool University Press did them. They command a large price of second hand, and this is the first one. And I was reading this last night. This was the one I pulled out the whole to look at, and it's got, basically, it's an anthology, but the essay at the beginning, which is called An Amazing Experiment, which is about 50 pages long, it's all about the foundations of the SF magazines, which starts, he looks at early magazines, the history of magazines, with fiction in them going right the way back to the 17th century. And then he sort of winds it forward. He talks about Hugo Gernsback and Amazing Stories, which is there. And of course, Astounding was John W. Campbell later on, and Harry Bates. And it's really great. I mean, this guy is a historian, you know. It's, you know, you can look all you like on the internet, but you've got to read these people. This is what it's really about. If you really want to be an expert and you really want to understand SF, you must have context. I've said this before, and this is a big part of what this channel is about, the context and the history, because it's really important. It's the only way you can judge anything. So I was really chuffed with that. And then the rest of it is all these wacky early stories by various sort of figures. And there's not a proper contents page, which is annoying, but just to sort of look through, Francis Flagg, R.F. Stars. I need to get this close because my eyes, I do apologise. D.D. Sharp, Charles Willard Diffin, Simak and Edmund Hamilton, Raymond Z. Galloon, about the only sort of really familiar names in there. But yeah, so that's marvellous. So that's my second Zardos All You Need Is Books haul. Thanks to Jules Burt, thanks to Maurice, and what a beautiful sort of lot of things. And as I say, we look at those anthologies there again, and I really can't wait to visit again. It was fantastic. I had time while Jules was filming his video, which you probably would have seen by now. It'll be a lot more professional than mine because Jules is way ahead with his production. And there's a voiceover interview with Maurice, who's a great guy. And you know, the beauty of that was it gave me some time just to look around and to shop, and to see other things for my next sort of haul, really. So there you go. It does leave me with a problem. I've got an A format overload where at Critical Mashers, I keep saying I'm doing some eBay selling. I've done enough almost this week to cover all this, which is really good. And my eBay is now up on the channel. There's a like on there, and I'll probably put up a video soon, it's probably up by now, of what I'm currently selling on eBay. So there you go. So this is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now. Please comment, like, subscribe. Super thanks if you want to support the channel even more, and I'll see you guys again soon. As I say, this is the last book haul for this year, the last Dangerous book haul, but come the new year there will of course be more. Bye for now. Right, well, I've done my list, and the thing is, I still want to find more. But you know, you've got to be realistic. You can't do it all, and it's all on the website. All you need is books, which is good. So there we are. So I guess while Jules finishes his mind-blown look around, because this is his first time here, this is my second, so I'm slightly calmer. I guess I'll just have a look and see what else pops up really.